Hello, thank you for being here. This talk is about censorship. I'm Claudio Agosti, Vice President of Hermes Center for Transparency in Digital Human Rights, independent researcher on a project about algorithm influence. Now, everybody of us will do a small introduction.
Hi, I'm Renato Gabriele. I'm the founder of the Observatory of Online Harassment and Media Manipulation. We studied censorship since 5 years, and we will want to share some new insight in the coming minutes.
Hi, my name is Jillian York. I'm going to be playing the dual role of speaking and somewhat moderating the panel as well. I'm the Director for International Freedom of Expression at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and I also run a project called OnlineCensorship.org, which looks at the role of social media corporations in censorship.
Hello, I'm Lina, Attalah. I come from Egypt. I'm the publisher and chief editor of a website called Mada, Masr, a bilingual news website based out of Cairo.
Hello, my name is Simone Basso. I'm a fellow at Measurement Lab, and I cooperate with the Unni project, which is a project that measures censorship in the internet.
So the panel is so diverse on the experience because we want to show how much censorship is a complex problem. It can be a technological problem, a political problem, or a social problem. As not a simple solution, we want to just show the different phases that censorship is passing through in those years. Now we have some small introduction from us, and then we want to open from a lot of question and answer, just because we want to integrate as much as possible consideration and feedbacks from the audience, and talk about the experience we made in the last times.
All right, so Claudio, we'll start with you, yeah?
Yes, thank you.
All right, so Claudio, just tell us quickly about the project that you're working on and what you see as the role of algorithms in whether you want to call it censorship or manipulation of content.
Thank you. The point is, in this moment, most of the information we get access are intermediated by algorithm. For example, you access Twitter or Facebook, and then you have a system, an algorithm, that decide what is valuable for you. So something that curate your informative experience. When you have, if you are following many sources, you can expect that those sources will just appear in your feed equally. You can expect that the algorithm will treat them fairly. As if you work in a newsroom, you communicate via Facebook expecting to reach your audience, but then you have no really accountability to understand how much you appear. So we made a test on 4 Italian news media. We see those columns represent how many posts those media published during 24 days. On green is Il Giornale, in yellow Il Fatto Quotidiano, in blue La Repubblica, and in red Il Manifesto. So are different media, because they have different amount of journalists and different logic inside, just produce diverse amount of content. Il Giornale, much more than the others. We had 6 users that they were following the same media and other pages. And we were expecting to see somehow some equal distribution. Now this graph has to be explained. What we observe is that despite this is the production of the content, the users, they were getting those media in different percentage. The only difference between the users is that they put different likes. In this case, you have a user that was liking Movement 5-star content. The other was liking right-wing content. It was during the Italian election, so we made the test with some kind of political orientation. What we saw is that despite Il Giornale was the media publishing more content than the others, was appearing in a certain amount only to the Movement 5-star and on the right-wing person. La Repubblica, that has been a media publishing near the half of Il Giornale, was appearing with a good percentage in all of the user. And that shows how something invisible in the platform decide how much a media will have visibility. Well, you can also see in different way. Just another kind of more realistic and concrete example. Do you remember the case of Macerata, when a fascist a person start to shoot to some migrants? Happened that we observe if those profiles were receiving the same kind of information, or if we can get some evidence of what is a filter bubble. We can see that, for example, Michele, that was the name of our profile, alt-right or far-right, was getting only this content. Antonietta, that is the person on the left, was getting those content. And Santiago, center-left, was getting all this content. And this is an example on how persons that are following the same media still can get a very diverse perception of the reality. Well, that's happened between different users. If the users are more informed, you can see that there is more different topics rising to someone and not to someone other. Here is about Macerata. So the only things in common is Macerata. The point is this censorship? Because in theory, the content is not deleted, it's not taken down. But then for the attention economy, you know that people around you can be completely aware or unaware of something that is happening. That was my point.
All right, so I'll ask you a couple of questions now. So Claudio, I mean, I see I think it's very apparent, this gap between these different profiles of different political orientation, but what responsibility do you think that platforms like Facebook have in breaking filter bubbles or in curating this content in a way that ensures that different individuals of different political backgrounds have access to a wide range of information?
Thank you. That's a nice question because, filter bubble is not just a technical issue. Filter bubble is something that is pretty human. You decide what you want to trust and what you don't want to trust. So it's normal that you have some trustworthy resource. Platforms are trying to capitalize on some kind of elements we don't really know. So for example, it's not clear why Repubblica is treated so well and the other media less. Or what. In this graph, apparently it seems that Il Manifesto, that is the minoritarian media, is appearing in all the profile. And if we want to judge this behavior of Facebook as fair, Facebook is giving visibility to Il Manifesto as much as is given to other media. In that sense, you can expect that because the users are expressing interest on a specific media, that will appear, but you cannot explain why the media that is publishing more content completely disappear to other profile. So we have not yet a definitive answer. The role of the platform, in my opinion, is that they are taking too much responsibility. It's not their responsibility to decide how to shape conversation. This responsibility has to be in the hand of the users. So what I hope in the future is that the user can, in theory, control their own algorithm. Because if the algorithm decide your information diet, that is something that belongs to you. It's not Facebook that has to decide what is fair.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to come back to you in a little bit. May I turn to you next? All right. Sorry, turn my mic on. Okay. All right, I'm going to turn to Simone next as well in the presentation. And so you're working with Unni, and you're looking at the different types of censorship, measuring different censorship on the network in different kinds of countries. I'm going to see what you've got to present to us, but I'll have a question for you after about that.
Okay, so yeah, the title is a little bit redundant in the sense that I wrote network level internet. It's maybe redundant, but this is just to give people the idea that there are many layers and many ways in which you can censor. In the end, you can see that censorship is a way of exercising power, And what the Unni project does actually is mainly looking at the network side. But even in that case, I will show you in a couple of examples, anecdotal examples, that there is always some power as in a state or a powerful corporation or whatnot that can in some way exercise power and decide what can or cannot happen. So a couple of words on Unni. Unni is a project within the Tor project, and Unni means Open Observatory of Network Interference. We do a lot of things, but like maybe the flagship product that we do is this mobile app that you can find on Play Store and App Store on iOS. And that app is called Uniprobe. And the role of this app is that this app allows you to run a number of tests to understand if there is censorship. And we have like thousands of volunteers worldwide that run this app in different countries to understand what's going on. This is just to like lay the foundation to explain you what it means to censor technically the internet. Like you have to imagine that there is this technical thingy called middle box, and this middle box is a device that is in the internet, and many providers have these devices deployed in their networks, and they are not like necessarily good or bad, but what they can do is that they can see the traffic that passes by, and they can decide whether the traffic complies to specific policies, so they can alter it or reject it, or like there are like a number of things that they can do to your internet traffic. And by internet traffic, I mean you browsing the web, you sending emails, and so forth. So like, for example, when I said it's not necessarily bad, I mean that specifically if now in this room you install the Uniprobe app and you run a test called HTTP invalid request line, which is a test to detect middle boxes, and you have Vodafone, you are in the Vodafone network, you will see that the test detects a middle box. Does this mean that there is censorship? Not necessarily. And this is like probably the first takeaway that I want to give you, that there is technology that may be used to accelerate your browsing or can be used to block you. And it's not necessarily black or white, the answer that you get. And so in all our measurements, we actually have 3 layers of things that we measure. Like when we access, for example, a website and try to understand if that is accessible in a specific country, in a specific moment in time and from a specific internet provider, we can say, okay, everything went smooth, so no, there is nothing here. Or we can say, maybe there is an anomaly, and this happens when we cannot connect, when there are like pages that are different from what we expect because we fetch them from other sources. And then there is a confirmed anomaly. A confirmed anomaly is when we have like a corpus of data from many sources, and like we can use a lot of ancillary measurements, and we can definitely conclude that there was something fishy going on. So this was the first like message, not black or white. And indeed, this is one of the main things that we compile, let's say, for the public. Explorer.uni.io shows you a map of the world, and you can click on each country, and you can see what measurements we have run. And an important aspect is that you see that little red like dot, let's say, on top of a country. When you see that, it means that there was a confirmed anomaly and we identified the specific device or vendor that was deployed and that was filtering traffic somehow. So things that we measured in the past. And also, let's like talk a little bit about the relationship between power and censorship. You all know the case of the Catalonia independence referendum. And then, like, shortly before the referendum, there were a number of websites that they were advocating for voting and maybe for voting leave. And many of them used the .cat top-level domain. So .cat is under the jurisdiction of Spain. And then, as a country, Spain, like many other countries do, exercised its power. And then it went to the maintainers of the cat registry and asked, in a not so politely way perhaps, to take down all the websites. And then what happened? It happened that there were also other websites, and those websites were not under the jurisdiction of Spain. And at this point, what Spain did, and this is what most countries that want to exercise their power on the internet do, Spain tried to block those websites. And what it did basically was to ask to the providers to, in a way, look into the internet traffic. And when there was sign of a specific website that was to be blocked, try to block it according to various techniques that can be employed. And I will be happy to say more on that later. So I'm not saying this to grill Spain, but I want to highlight two things. A, that all countries in the world that I'm aware of, they are going towards exercising their power onto the segment of internet that is related to them. And when they cannot use their own domestic law to interact with things that they think are illegal, then they use techniques like technology to prevent people from accessing those extra sites that are abroad. And then the second part is indeed that we are seeing this in all the world. It's not something that, there is not only China. All the world is implementing infrastructure. Just 5 minutes ago, I saw a tweet regarding the GCHQ and the UK, in which they were basically saying that they are implementing filters that filter a lot of, I think, 200 new domains per day. So all the world is becoming capable of filtering. And then second part, again, case study if you want, and again, a nice, I think, explanation of the link between power and access to information, Cuba. So I was there, we would, a team of 3 persons of Unni, we went there and we spent 11 days in Cuba, and we got to know everything we could around Cuban internet. And the first and most important takeaway is that actually there are not very complex or sophisticated filters there, but the main way to prevent people from going online in Cuba is that there is no private internet. You cannot have internet at home. There are only hotspots, Wi-Fi hotspots in some parks. You probably see the picture, and then you have to go there to go online. And second, the salary of an average person is around $30, and roughly 1 hour of internet costs $1. So it's very expensive to go online. And by as a consequence of that, basically it's very limited the amount of persons that go online. And then there is also filtering, but again, it's a combination of ways in which countries try to exercise their power on the internet. It's not just one single thingy, and technology is used as much as it's needed. And then interesting stuff that we discovered, we think there was evidence that Chinese devices were also used there. So probably at least Cuba purchased Chinese technology to do some of this stuff. And then what was mainly blocked was media outlets and sites that were criticizing the government. And I think this is it for my presentation. Yeah.
Great.
Your question?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is something that I studied about 10 years ago, and I know that the landscape has changed quite a bit. And so I'm curious, I can see different common threads here, but are there any particular trends that you're seeing across different regions of the world, whether it's about the types of speech that are being censored, or about the methods being used, or what have you?
Yeah, so there are places. So I would say it's there are 2 lanes. There are a number of countries that are using relatively cheap, easy, not costly, and not very effective techniques. But at the same time, there are countries that are really arming themselves and acquiring very complex technology. And so, for example, as you all know, there is a very sophisticated system at the border of China that is non-deterministic, not easily predictable. So it's not like that you run a measurement and you always get the same result. And generally, I would imagine that sensors would go towards making it look like the internet is not working very well, more than providing like a direct this is blocked feedback, unless there is like a law that mandates that you need in a way to disclose that. But I see that there is a technology that I didn't mention explicitly, but it's in the slides, called deep packet inspection. This technology basically allows you to see inside the content, and then so basically, this is increasingly deployed and allows to do quite sophisticated things. And then there is another thing that I would like to highlight, which is we often think that encrypting stuff solves many problems, but actually it's not necessarily the case. So, for example, think about movies, right? Every movie has more or less a specific length, and the pattern of the movie, like how fast images are changing, or the volume, is something that differentiates each movie. So there were researchers that were able to understand which movie you were seeing, even though from Netflix, even though that was encrypted. So this is something to keep in mind. There is a lot of analysis, even if you encrypt everything, that is possible to do.
Great, thank you. I'm going to come back to some of these questions later as well. I'm going to turn to Lina, because there was something interesting said just now that I think is a nice lead-in to what's happening in Egypt. So I'll let you tell it, but one of the more recent censorship incidents or events in Egypt involved that very method that Simone just mentioned, the slowing down of sites. So what can you tell us about that?
So in May of last year, so it's been almost a year by now, we're working normally in our offices. I run this local news web in Egypt and Cairo, and we were working normally, and all of a sudden, we could not reach the back end of our website, and we thought it was an internet issue. And then, our readers started complaining about not being able to reach our website. And it turned out, after some testing, that there is some sort of a circumvention on the access to our website. Upon further testing, we understood that it was, in fact, a DPI, a deep packet inspection, which is the mechanism used by the government to block our website. Back then, alongside another 10 websites, without any legal instrument, in the sense that we didn't, for example, get a notification that our website is being blocked by this particular authority because of a particular type of content. Instead, we found in some state-aligned media, some news citing anonymous security sources, that there is a move to block some news websites because they are publishing information that is harming the country. Two things I'd like to say here. First, because of this nature of blocking that Simone talked about now, which is that you don't quite understand if a website is blocked, is 100% blocked or partially blocked. A year into this situation, and now, by the way, we've moved on from being 10 websites being blocked to over 500 over the span of this year. People don't quite know if we are in fact blocked or not. So this also has harmed the possibility of this becoming a strong campaign against censorship, because some people on certain ISPs can reach the website sometimes and others can't. So it's quite confusing. I get a lot of messages from friends saying, congratulations, it seems the website is back. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, it's not. We are actually blocked. The second thing is, because it's being done in this very soft, quote-unquote way, it's been very hard actually to make a legal claim out of it. Again, there wasn't any legal instrument or there wasn't any official method through which this DPI mechanism was used on all our websites. We are one of only 2 websites out of the 500 that decided to take the matter to court. But in fact, it was very hard to decide who exactly to take to court. So we started off by taking the telecom regulator to court. And, they sent in the lawyers and said, we have nothing to do with this, actually. Maybe you should, take to court security apparatuses. We don't even have the technical means to do this. So, of course, it's very hard to take security apparatuses to court in a country like Egypt, but we still decided to do that because we needed to use this case to just aggregate information as much as possible as to what is going on with this massive development of the government moving to blocking websites. And I have to put this in a context where Egypt, and Jillian will know this very well, is not a country that typically blocked websites, unlike other countries in the region historically who would do that, like Tunisia and Syria. Egypt, in fact, out of, as part of its economic openness policies, it has always resorted to opening up the internet completely and just targeting individuals and taking them to jail or prosecuting them and so on. So this is a massive development, but also because it's done in this very intelligent yet pervasive way, it's been very hard to fight it on a public level, on a legal level, and not to mention on a technical level, because also the alternative publishing mechanisms are being also fought and resisted by the authorities. So
I'm just going to put you on the spot and ask you one follow-up question to that, which is, what do you think prompted this change in methods?
I mean, this cannot be completely separated from what happened in 2011, which is the year of the revolutions, of the Arab revolutions, and it's the year where the authorities paid attention to the fact that this very open internet that they opened up deliberately for economic reasons is also a source of threat. So there is an increasing sort of attention to this unregulated space. And then we have a new authority right now, so a new authority that is very much a military authority. So it's also a new, it's a militarization of this space as part of the new method of rule in the country. And I guess the second more specific thing is the fact that a lot of the mainstream media that have, which presence pre-existed the internet in the form of newspapers and in the form of televisions, have been either co-opted or completely controlled by the authorities. But the internet remained a space for media websites to continue to thrive, continue to publish alternative narratives. And we still operate in a context where web media is not controlled by any law. And there is a move towards legalizing online media right now. So I think the thinking was, until this happens, this is a good sort of intermediate step to stop a lot of the information and the narratives that we're propagating, maybe.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to turn, last but not least, to our final panelist. I know that you have a slide. Yeah, some slides that you'd like to show us. So we'll start there.
Okay, I do not have technical slides, so you can relax for a couple of minutes. We will talk about something a little bit different from what you heard by my friends here about censorship. And before to show you some very interesting and very nice, beautiful photo and video, I want to introduce you how and from where this kind of information comes. So I say that I'm the founder of the Observatory of Line Harassment and Media Manipulation, because it's from our system and from our data and big data that come this new kind of form of censorship that we are collecting all around the world since more than 5 years and a half, close to 5. We started to see in Italy, now I'm talking specifically about why this project started to collect censorship, because 4 years ago we was not aware that we was trying to monitor and understand how the backend of the censorship system works. In the beginning, we started to realize that, yes, Cambridge Analytica was doing computational propaganda in Italy since 2012. We identified this kind of threat between 2013 and 2014. During the primary election at the end of 2013 and during the European election in Italy in 2014. And all our information details and all metadata and forensic activity over many dozens of millions of conversations on social network always pushed us to look in London, and later we understood very better how that job was done. Especially because in the last 2 years, this happened again. From the leaks we know that it's not the source from Cambridge Analytica, but we found a real clear correlation between 3 or 4 different swarm and botnets that's doing computational propaganda every day in this country in the same way that happened in 2012 in Mexico. That's why since the summer of last year, we started to decide to share our work and our data, because we found that that kind of computational propaganda was still going on in a massive way. So, the most interesting part of this will be the second example. The first example is something that we got and is called on the Twitter platform withheld censorship. So they released a couple of years ago in the API a methodology to support multilateral censorship. So a content, a person, an image can be censored in one country but not in one other country. The share of a tweet could be censored in another country different from the country where the tweet was published for the first time. So let me show you an example. Tom Bola in the United States tweeted something usual about something was going on in the United States. This tweet was withheld. It means that in the United States, nobody saw these tweets. But all around the world, probably they saw these tweets. That's mean multilateral censorship. So they can decide if the content, a word, the user, the link, the photo, or the image could be censored somewhere, but not somewhere else. This is something that also the Stasi in Germany would have in their assets at the time, because this is very particular way to do censorship, because it was introduced to protect intellectual property. If someone published photo, picture, content, documents where the rights it's owned by someone else, then the people that share this on the Twitter platform. But like you can see, this is used not for that intent. This is used to do multilateral censorship, so that if, for example, tweets that contain Nazi term never will be seen in Germany, because they withheld in Germany everything related with Nazi content. But in all the other countries, that content is visible. So using multilateral censorship, you can decide if someone say there is a white genocide, or if someone say there is the black genocide. With the multilateral censorship, the platform can decide where something requires censorship or not. This is not like the traditional censorship where something is not good everywhere. This is censorship. In this kind, they decide what is right for which country, depending about the content and the data. This is something that, why this is not very well known actually, because it's not used much in the United States. The most part of withheld tweets are outside the United States. So to get and monitor this kind of censorship, you need censor all around the world because you have to be present in the country where something is censored, and you have to be present in a country where that content is not censored because there is no other way to understand that this happened. Why? Because it works in this way. Oops. It's not only a very innovative way of censorship, it's also like cyberbullying. So, oh, this is, yeah, sure. These are two pictures that present my timeline where I see that someone else was censored, and in my timeline I see the name of the people that I'm following that was censored with a withheld case. So I see a message. This retweet from Paolo Stirparo has been withheld in response to a report from the copyright holder. This is a standard message they always say, independently if it was related with the copyright holder or not. So everyone that knows this guy, and he is a very famous guy who works in cybersecurity, currently is working in Google in Zurigo, but in the past he was a consultant in the technical commission of the European Commission. And everyone on the Twitter platform can see that he was withheld. He did something wrong. He was censored. So I contacted him and I asked to him what he did to understand exactly which kind of censorship was related with his tweet. He was very surprised. He was not informed about this. He was not informed to be censored by Twitter. That's because you not receive an email when you are censored in this way. You get only a very simple notification, and this the second image in which Paolo Stirparo could verify with a very small line of notification that someone was withheld. So he was not aware about this, but everyone that was looking or searching for that content realized this on the platform. I don't know how do you think this can work in the country you live, but in Italy, by example, but in many other European countries, this is against the law because you cannot say in public that someone else did something wrong without he is informed about this one. It's like bullying. Frequently, this is in Italy is called defamation. Is when you put in the public a fact accusing someone else to have done something wrong, and he is not informed about that. In Italy, this is one of the most risky things to do, also for journalists, because the defamation is one of the most common ways to censor journalists or citizens in this country. A second example of censorship that I will show to you is much better because it's only picture. And this is a very, very new way to censor the people. This has started to be very, very common since the last summer, since when all the actors that are doing computational propaganda that we see in Spain, in Italy, in Germany, in UK, in Turkey, in Argentina, Venezuela, and many other countries, is very, very sophisticated and new. They found a way to make massive harassment and denigration against activists, people, or people that are exposed on the media. Imagine about the two guys that become overexposed on the media after the school shooting a couple of months ago. Just in one day, they was bombarded with 1,200,000 tweets. This is a new way of censorship organized, obviously, by very, very big organizations, probably states or someone that want to become the next holder of states. And what they do a massive attack. This is a couple of pictures, not related with the American case of the school shooting, but is related with the case of our President of Chamber of Deputies, Laura Boldrini. He started to fight harassment on the social network in the middle of the last year. In these two pictures, you see a massive harassment organized by a couple of computational propaganda actors that are doing what I call the pre-truth. Push tons of conversation on the web, doing denigration against someone else. In this case, because she is a woman, the most part of their content are threat against her like a woman, not because a political or institutional personality. This to do computational propaganda, but in this case, this is real harassment, traits of death, traits of violence, and many, many other things. So in these two pictures, we see what we result by our system. We can see that only just a bunch of people was harassing her with words or images. Most part of the user was organized and structured. The second slide shows the colors that permit us to recognize a different kind of actors that are doing computational propaganda, because in that period we were not aware that we will held the election in March. So there was a very, very huge activity on our Twitter sphere about politics. And like you see, most of the users that are banned, these are 25,000 conversations related to nearly 5,000 different users, were coordinated and organized, not just between accounts of the same botnet, but also in the timing, so that she are attacked every day. So let me go on the next slide. This is another victim. I call this victim because effectively when someone organizes a computational propaganda to harass something, in this case it's Federica Angeli, is a journalist, she received a very heavy threat of death because she is testifying against the mafia of Ostia and Rome in Italy. And for a very, very unlucky situation, this computational propaganda decided to harass her because there was the election in the Ostia and in Rome at that period. So there was a mix of interest between computational propaganda and harassment from well-defined actors. Here we see that we are able not only to catch the metadata about what's going on in the reality, but in a second time we compare all our big data with what's happened now, if Twitter did something or changed something. So we see that thousands of users were cancelled, suspended, and content deleted. But like we see every time, and every day in this case, and then I finish, we see that the most part of the censor is self-censorship. People that decide to delete their account profile or the content that they shared, probably because they regret about what they share. What is very, very surprising is the number of the users that are censored and suspended by Twitter is only a few part of the users involved in this situation. And usually the mostly motivation, the 99% of the motivation is because they violate the rate limits. Most part of the threat and harassment statement are still present online. Okay, we can show a video if you want, or we can show it later.
Is it longer? How much?
No, we can interrupt in a way.
Go with the video.
So they wanted to launch the video from the back room. Are you ready? Okay. So this is a video to show the progress in verifying if the content that was censored was really offline. So I say that this data is coming from the last summer. So the newest information censored in this big data set is in the middle of November. So that data don't have to be online on the internet. That data should be deleted because censored by Twitter or censored by the user. But like you see, I cannot show the name of the images, the name of the user, the name of the conversation, neither say if this is Twitter, Facebook, or Google, because doing this, I could violate all Twitter policies and also many, many other laws, because this data should disappear from the internet by, like you could see, or like you saw in the slide, the 75% of this data set is still online. And in our opinion, this is not only against the policy and rules of the user that want delete the profile and make disappear this data. I think that most of this violate many regulations in Italy and Europe, because we have data retention law and privacy law. You cannot maintain online data that should disappear, especially if these are all data related with a censorship activity or self-censorship activity. And you can break the video, thank you. And what you see now is a mosaic with all the image, more than 7,000 images was recovered by this metadata. These are mosaics. This is the only way, actually, before we could verify with the privacy authority in Italy and Europe, a way to share and analyze this kind of data. All these images are composed using images, video, and profile photo that should not be online anymore, because censored by Twitter or censored by the user. Thank you for your patents.
Thank you.
Question, Jillian?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm really curious. There's a lot there to unpack. I think that with the first example that you gave in terms of the takedowns country by country, Twitter announced that policy in 2012. And it's true that up until 2017, I think, they had not yet done it in the United States. That was the first example. That was one of the first. I'm curious, what do you think is the implication for that when you have platforms, and also just I should point out, Facebook does the same thing. Yeah. What do you think the implication is when platforms are censoring content in certain countries and not in others? What does that create? What sort of environment does that create for us?
My opinion is that this kind of censorship, I think we cannot call this censorship, because it's something completely different. So if you say censorship, you say that someone censors something for everyone. This case is completely different, in my opinion, because if you really do this like they promised, to manage the protection of intellectual property, so you have to protect a brand, an image, something that someone else owns the right. No one has to discuss this. This cannot be called censorship. This is protecting intellectual property, not censorship. But we see that these are used in a very, very different manner. I try to make the example of a very, very strong example. So if you say, please save the white from the genocide, or you say, please save the black for the genocide, so we can imagine that we can expect that the platform will use the multilateral censorship to decide something different than what's good and what's wrong. They decide what's wrong in which place, for who are reading that information, that data, from who is publishing that data. So we can be aware about what is censored, because it's not only not transparent, but there's no way to understand when it's happened, and the victim of this kind of censorship are not informed, not aware. But multilateral censorship is something that permits the people, it's like disinformation, it's like some news disappear on a newspaper in this country, but is visible only from another country. And this can be the vice versa at the same time. It's similar to what showed also back now on Facebook. So we could be censored without being informed, neither the other are informed why and how about this one. I'm not sure if I answered. But
thank you. All right, now I'm gonna ask a question to the whole panel, and anyone can feel free to jump in on this. There was a piece a couple of months ago that some of you may have read by Zeynep Tufekci in Wired about the golden age of free speech, and she posited in this piece that we've reached this point in time where you have all of this freedom of expression on the internet, and people are taking advantage of it, and there's all of these different types of things happening, from the kinds of things we might find positive activism, to hate speech, organizing around white supremacy. And she said that the very definition of censorship is changing. And there's a great quote from that: "The most effective forms of censorship today involve meddling with trust and attention, not muzzling speech itself." And I'm curious, particularly Claudio, perhaps, what you think of that, and do you see that as, in terms of your research, do you see that as what's happening there? Do you see, yeah? Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, it's what is also called the attention economy, in the sense that we are so exposed to such amount of information, we maybe fail to give the proper importance to something that seems to be relevant. And that end up that the importance of a specific news do not depend exactly from the kind of tone or the kind of visibility that this news is getting, but rather it depends on our social context, our prejudice, our expectation, and our prejudgment on the topic. And that's, in theory, show exactly how the social platforms were different 10 years ago, when internet was somehow used as a way to empower new voices, because they were finding in internet a channel where they can get visibility. Instead, now the kind of overload of content is making this attention economy and exploitation of positioning or promoted content or sponsored content by network effects that somehow is limiting the initial power that we saw on the internet.
Yeah, I think this is part of what is happening, and I think it makes sense for the Western world. But I think what is happening in the rest of the world is a bit different. For example, you think about China. In China, you have an alignment of owning social media platforms and the state. So those actors are aligned. I think part of what we are seeing is because, on the one hand, take for example the case of Italy. Facebook is not Italian. It's not easy to enforce Italian laws on Facebook, and we have this historical partnership with the United States, such that it's natural that we are using United States services. But this is not what is happening in other contexts. And then in our case, there is this misalignment, and this open up possibilities and needs like the multilateral censorship thing, which is something that in a way you need to have. But if you think I don't know, what happened to any big internet company that wanted to do business in China, they were told that they needed to do something like the multilateral thingy on the rocks, much more hard. So I don't know, it's interesting as a quote. My personal feeling is that there is a Westphaliazation, so the principle of Westphalia, where you have a king and that king decides upon a realm, is happening in the internet, at least in the global south. And then it remains to see what is happening in our world. And that's not totally clear to me.
Lina, you want to comment?
Yeah, I think I agree a lot with Simone in the sense that even though there is a trend of the internet, the capitalization over the internet to render it a tool of monetization, and according the algorithms becoming a form of censorship, this cannot preclude the fact that you have still a survival, a very strong survival of the traditional sort of forms of censorship over free speech. And it's very interesting to see this collusion between capitalism when it comes to thinking of algorithms and the control over the internet on one hand, and then on the other hand the highly concentrated infrastructure in places like Egypt, where the government doesn't only sort of control politically, but it also owns the majority shares in the main ISP, for example. So that renders censorship very easy because the actual infrastructure is highly concentrated in the hands of the government. So you have a collision of capitalism, but also very sort of traditional forms of state control over the economy, actually. So.
Do we have 15 minutes left? Is that right?
Time is it? I don't know.
It's 6:45.
Yes.
Do we want to open? Do we have any questions from the audience? I want to just give an opportunity, since I'm realizing we're running close to the end of the session. Any questions from out there? I can keep going, but I don't have to. Yes. Mike is coming to you.
Thanks for the overview. Is there a place where we can find tools that we can use to see to which level the censorship in the places where we work exists? And second question is, if I were to work, for example, against harassment of female profiles on Facebook, is there a way to measure the reach of it before I start my actions? Is there any way how to actually measure the situation, to go for the funds to say, okay, I'm going to fight it?
I guess I can answer for the second part, but the first is on Simone.
So, yeah, like the tool that I described, Uniprobe, is good to understand what is happening in the network. I think there is no tool around that can give you like a holistic view and from different levels. So, for example, we have no way to understand what's going on Facebook. We don't measure that. We can measure, for example, the blocking of Messenger, but we just try to connect to Messenger servers. So, like, there is no tool that does everything, let's say.
That is to check if your network is effectively reaching the service. Instead, inside of the service, we need to do other kind of measurement. So specific for your topic, happened that in a few days will be released by the Web Foundation a report that yesterday has been anticipated in a panel. Was explained by Renato, that is present. Basically, in the test we made in Argentina, we had 6 female profiles that they were reading the news. Some news was talking about feminicide or domestic violence, but despite they can be, in theory, the proper target audience, they never get those information. In order to observe this subtle way to censor or just to don't make appear a content, we need to make a copy of the timeline that the user were receiving from Facebook. If you do a copy of what you are getting, then you can later on do a comparison and see if what has been hidden was for you important, or you can compare this copy with other copies and understand which were the difference perceived. Now, your specific context seems that you want to publish. You want to publish advocacy material. So your concern is how much you can be visible to your audience. And the only way is that you need to have some person that belongs to your audience install a tool that do this copy and later on do the verification. This can be a way to also keep Facebook accountable. That is one of our goals. The tool Facebook Tracking Exposed do this copy for you. I will. Just because I have the URL that I can show here.
While you're pulling that up, do you want to jump in as well?
Oops. Related to the data that I showed a few minutes ago, I have to say that the system is not available yet to the public because I quoted the policy of the platform and also law related with this kind of data. So you can save, analyze this kind of data, but you cannot share that. So we have to find a way to do this with an agreement with the platform. So we are collaborating with the Documented Now project in the United States. So we are sharing and working with this data set since many years, and most of this data we released yet in the public channel of the Documented Now project. So we released the state censorship campaign in Spain, like Estamos por ti. We released also other kind of censorship data and data set related to the drive-by shooting or shoot-by driving. I'm not an expert about crime in foreign languages. That happened in Macerata a few months ago. It started a massive threat and harassment of any kind at that period. So we released the entire data set for the other American researcher because it's very common with what's happening with Black Lives Matter and school shooting in the past. But it's very difficult. We have a letter from Twitter that authorized us to share EDS, I mean identification number of conversation, much bigger than the sites today permitted by the policy. So we hope that very soon the platform, instead to say lie and reduce their responsibility in what's going on their platform, they start really to share with the researcher data and information and make us possible to share this kind of information. Think we can analyze and monitor harassment, but we cannot share anything we see or found. We can only give back to other people identification number, but if this information is censored, that information cannot be used anymore to get the original data and information. So there's something that have to be solved to permit us to answer this question and permit us to release tools that permit the user to verify by themselves what's going on.
I mean, I'm not a person who can advise on tools because I don't work on censorship. I work with censorship rather. But an important thing I'd like to say is that publishers also should have a consciousness of how to deal with these things, in the sense that, you know, in the journalistic community, obviously, especially on the publishers' end, there is a tendency to basically succumb to, you know, social media, what's on social media offerings in order to disseminate the content, because, you know, in a lot of the cases, Facebook, for example, would be one of the main drivers of traffic to these websites. And it's important to, you know, deal with this with a good level of criticality. So I'm not going to be able to be radical enough and say I'm not going to post any content on Facebook, but I'm very aware, and my social media team is very aware, that they should be developing also alternative and parallel mechanisms of dissemination, including even good old newsletters and things like this. So a critical position from publishers is very important, I think, to also resist algorithm-based censorship.
Do we have other questions from the audience? Okay, well then I'll ask a question again to the panel and say, okay, so we have, I mean, I didn't speak much. I'll give you a quick thought on what I'm thinking about. Take off my moderator hat, put on my work hat. The work that I've been doing for the past few years, and that I'm now writing a book about, is looking at the ways that these companies have sort of centralized the process of censorship. And I agree with a lot of the thoughts that have been given here about, you know, what is censorship, what does it mean? But for me, really, the term censorship is value neutral. It doesn't mean, you know, just the stuff that we are upset about being taken offline. It also means the things that we, you know, agree with being censored sometimes, and I think that it can be a democratic proposition. But the concern that I have is the way that this has been centered throughout a number of companies that are all controlled out of California and out of Washington, D.C. And of course, I'm talking about Facebook and Twitter, Google to some degree, YouTube, which is a Google property, etc. And so, to me, I am definitely concerned about the issue of, the algorithmic manipulation in the feed, but I'm also concerned about the way that these companies are employing both humans and machine learning algorithms to take down content. And a lot of this is done at the request of governments. We see governments going to these companies. That's a lot of the times where the tweet has been withheld. That was done at the request of a government. But we also see these companies instituting their own proprietary rules that they then use sometimes as a cudgel to take down speech that they don't like. And so, yeah, we might agree with a lot of those rules. We might all in this room say, yes, let's agree that terrorism's bad, we'll take down terrorism. But who decides what the definition of terrorism is? And what we're seeing right now is that that's a small number of mostly white men in Silicon Valley who went to Harvard, making these decisions for the rest of the world. And that photo that you had up there was perfect, because those mosaics, those are the people making these decisions. And so that's my introduction to the question that I'm going to ask of everyone, which is to say that, what do we do about this? Because we have governments working with companies, both as in the case of China, but also Western governments going to companies to ask them to remove content. We have the German law, of course, that's been talked about a lot at the festival. And then we have, of course, self-censorship, which happens in a lot of different contexts. We see it because of harassment. We see it in places like Egypt, where people are afraid of the consequences of their speech. And so what's next? What do we do next to get out of the mess that we've found ourselves in? I know it's a big question, but... And we've got 2 minutes to answer it, so we can just go down real quick.
If it is a centralization problem, I wonder if more decentralization can be the answer. So in theory, you belong to a society, an organization, and in your society, stay also the value deciding what is okay, what is not. That at least can more respect the cultural diversity.
I think that we have to step down the platform about this point, because if they do not open to researcher, it is decentralized or centralized, it doesn't matter in censorship. If we cannot understand what's going on, we are not able to say that they are democratic and they are acting like a democratic company. Capitalists, they do money, but they have to be democratic in all around the world. And this is not happening. So I listened to the Mark Zuckerberg statement at the Senate. Like usual, they propose to share with US researcher data, but in US, they lack the law that the same Mark Zuckerberg said a few minutes later that they want to respect all around the world because of the best privacy law that exists. So we need access to researcher in some way to permit the people to know what's going on and to permit the government too to verify that the platform do what they say, because actually we have no idea if they say the truth when they answer to the Senate, by example.
I agree.
I mean, again, from a publisher perspective, I guess, more criticality. If algorithm is controlling what gets shown out of our content and what doesn't, I think, without being too technical about it, there is a way to, inhabit a condition where you're also sometimes tricking the algorithms, and that's not very far from our practice as journalists. So we're not always supposed to be producing something that the public is expecting. We're supposed to constantly surprise the public. So by that very token, we can also trick the algorithms that make our content quite expected, quite predictable, and hence channelable to like particular communities. So I guess a level of criticality that can make us, be somehow, over this control.
Yeah, so by heart my answer would be, let's make the internet less centralized, but then I realized this is not so easy. And then perhaps the answer is that there is no black and white, but maybe the possibility of transitioning in a way smoothly by embedding some circumvention technology and stuff like browsers that allows you, when you see something that is blocked, to step aside and find it. That maybe can help to reduce the issues.
Great. I want to thank all of my panelists, thank the audience, or not my panelists, Claudio's panelists, really, I didn't organize it, I'm just moderating. Thank all of the panelists, thank the audience, and enjoy your aperitivo.